Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the best books of 2025. This is one of my favorite videos to make every single year because I love getting to shout out my favorite books. And in 2025 especially, I had such an incredible reading year. I mean, right now I'm sitting at about like 240 books read for this year, which is the most books that I have ever read in any given year. I have definitely locked in my top 15 favorite books that I've read this year, as well as a top 10 honorable mentions that I wanted to let you know about because I've just had such a great reading year, and it was actually even hard for me to narrow down this list of top 10 honorable mentions because I had a list of like 25 books that I wanted to tell you about. But some of my honorable mentions this year that were this close to making it into my top 15 include One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune. In my opinion, this was like the perfect summer romance book. I highly recommend reading this one in the summertime by a lake. It just had the best vibes. I also absolutely loved Ready or Not by Cara Stone. I really thought this one wasn't going to be my thing because it involves like pregnancy in the romance book, but it was the cutest thing ever, and Shep is one of my favorite male love interests that I've read all year long. I also have Famous by Blake Crouch. This book was absolutely unhinged and ridiculous, and it involved doppelgangers, which is one of my favorite things ever in Blake Crouch. Like, his writing is just so good. I also have Deep Cuts, which this book sent me on an absolute roller coaster when I read it this year because I really wasn't liking it in like the first 80 pages, so much to the point where I almost DNF'd it. And then the second half of this book I loved so much, and I think if you're a person who really loves music and you love conversations about music, especially pop music, then I do think you would really like this. I also have The Blue Book of Nebo, and this is another one that completely took me off guard. It's kind of like an apocalyptic fiction kind of novel about this mother and this son, and the way this book was written was just so stunning. Another gorgeously written book is Wild Dark Shore. This one has really great atmosphere because it's taking place on this island, and there's a little bit of mystery in the story as well, and this book has such strong characters that you want to root for. I also absolutely loved What Hunger by Catherine Dang. This is a horror novel that follows this young teenage girl who starts to get an obsession with eating raw meat. It's very gross and disgusting, but like in all the ways that I love when I read a horror book, and this is definitely one of those like female rage type of stories that just really work for me. And then another horror novella that I loved was Pocket Knife Kitty by Shannon Riley. This horror novella is so underrated, and I need more people to go and check this one out, especially if you liked the movie It Follows. This was so disturbing. I also really loved Out on a Limb. This is another romance book that actually deals with pregnancy that I didn't think that I would like, but this was so gorgeous. It was so well written. It had great characters, and like these were like some of the least toxic people I've ever read about. Like, they were so wholesome and so cute. And then also Fan Service by Rosie Dannon. I had to shout out this book because of how much I loved this year. This one is like a paranormal romance about this guy. He used to play this character on a TV show that would turn into a werewolf, and then all of a sudden in real life he starts turning into a werewolf, and then he reaches out to one of the show's biggest fans to try and help him figure out like what's happening with him, and it's like a romance between them. Oh, this was so cute, and I really think if you were a fan of like The Vampire Diaries or like Teen Wolf or any of those shows, I think this would be your jam. Oh my god, this was so fun. All right, so those were all of my honorable mentions, and now let's get into my top 15 books that I read this year. Coming in at number 15 has got to be Walking Practice. This one is a horror novella that is translated from Korean, and in this story we're following this shape-shifting alien who finds themselves stranded on Earth. They actually start to use this dating app so that they can meet people to eat them. I feel like the reason why this book ended up on my favorites list is because it's one of the most like weird and strange and grotesque books that I've read this year, because some of the body horror in this is pretty extreme, but also because I loved the different commentary that was packed into this book as well about gender, because our alien in this book identifies as non-binary, and the way that this alien like observes humanity and like the obsession that we all have with gender and like putting a gender to everything, it was just so fascinating. And I also think the translation in this book was done so well. There's actually a really great note from the translator at the end of this book talking about why they decided to translate certain parts the way they did. The book also just makes you feel like you're insane towards the end because there are pages that look like this, and it's also really cool because there are a lot of illustrations about, you know, this alien and like what this alien looks like included throughout the book. Like, look at how cool that is. There's just so much to love about this one, and I really do love stories where you're following from the perspective of like an alien type of character who's like observing humanity and kind of like making fun of us. That's one of my personal favorite things, and I think that's why I love this one so much. All right, coming in at number 14 is going to be Crash Test by Amy James. Okay, this one is a male-male romance that involves F1 racers. One of these guys is an F1 driver, and then the other guy is an F2 driver, and at the start of this book they've been secretly dating for a year and like nobody knows. But then right at the start, the guy Jacob, who's the F2 driver, he ends up getting in this really bad accident and he has to be like airlifted to the hospital. And Travis, the F1 driver, who's his secret boyfriend, doesn't know what to do because he wants to go to the hospital to like be there for his boyfriend, but like nobody knows that they're dating, including Jacob's family, and he doesn't want to like let their secret relationship get leaked to the media. And I loved the way this book was written because you're getting present day chapters when like the car accident is happening, but then you're also getting flashback chapters to the beginning of their relationship and kind of getting to see how they met each other and how they fell in love in the first place. And dude, there was something about this book, okay, it literally read like fan fiction to me, and I mean that in like the best way possible. I wanted this book injected into my veins. Like there was something about it, it was so addicting. I can't even explain why. The writing quality is like not necessarily the best thing that I've ever read, but like there was something about these characters that I felt so drawn into their story. And this was the kind of book where like I found it so hard to put down. Like I just had to see where the story was going. I had to know what was gonna happen next. I annotated so many different things in this book that I just loved. And even though I will admit I do enjoy Travis's character a lot more than Jacob, like Jacob kind of drove me nuts at different points in this book, but like I don't even care. This book ended up on my favorites list because of how it made me feel. I need all of the queer sports romances in my life after how much I love this book. And this book actually like made me curious about learning more about F1 because I really liked the way that the races were described in this one. I've never really been into like F1 or like any kind of car racing stuff, but this was fascinating. Okay, coming in at number 13 is going to be Next Time Will Be Our Turn. This is a romance book that I actually just recently read. Like I just read this in the month of December. I will post the reading vlog down below where I just read this one if you missed it, because this book made me emotional. Like I was crying like a little bitch at the end of this book. And it's actually so crazy too because this is the author of a lot of like cozy mysteries. Like the same author as Dial A for Aunties or like Vera Wong, those kind of books. And I was not expecting to love a romance from this author so freaking much. But this one is actually a sapphic romance that reads a little bit more like historical fiction. So in this story, we're following this young girl named Izzy Chen. And at the start of this book, her grandmother, Magnolia, she shows up at their Chinese New Year celebration with a woman. And then her whole family is like reacting really badly to her grandmother bringing a woman. And then Izzy's starting to feel ashamed because she's also kind of been feeling like maybe she's queer herself. And so then her grandmother, Magnolia, like she kind of sees that in her. And so she sits her down and tells her this story about this girl that she met when she was a teenager and how they fell in love. And so this story is not really about Izzy, her granddaughter, but it's actually about Magnolia. And we get flashback chapters in the 90s when she was a teenager and she was falling in love with this girl. Oh my god, I loved this book so much. It reminded me of so many of like some of my all-time favorite things. Like Evelyn Hugo, it definitely had a lot of Evelyn Hugo vibes. It also reminded me of The Notebook. It reminded me of like How I Met Your Mother with like the storytelling of like this grandmother telling her granddaughter about her life. I also love that there was so much commentary in this book about what it was like for this young girl to be like Chinese and Indonesian growing up in America in the 90s and like how difficult that was for her and her sister. And like the romance was genuinely so sweet and so wholesome. But this will also be the kind of book that will like absolutely break your heart and step on it. Like what the fuck? The ending of this book was so beautiful and like gut-wrenching, and it just crushed me. It crushed my spirit, but like in the best way. Like this is a book that I'll never forget. I'll think about this story and these characters forever. Coming in at number 12 is another recent favorite of mine because it's Heartwood. And this is like one of those books that feels like it was written just for me. This one is kind of described as like a literary fiction that kind of has some like mystery thriller elements to the story because it's mainly about this 42-year-old woman who goes missing on the Appalachian Trail. And we get a few different perspectives in this book because we do get the woman's perspective who goes missing, but we only get her perspective in letters that she's written to her mother while she's on the trail. And then we also do get the perspective of this female detective who's going to be like working on the case. And then we get a third perspective from this 76-year-old birdwatcher who is going to be like trying to help with the case as well. I mean, this was one of those books that for me, like as soon as I read the first chapter of this, I had a gut feeling that this was going to be like a 5-star new all-time favorite because I love that the opening chapter is a chapter that Valerie writes to her mother when she says, "I didn't want to grow up, but naturally I had no choice and I grew up anyway. Eventually I understood that motherhood, as the child imagines it, is unperformable. No woman is a star, no woman is a god or a tree or a magician, but for a while in your arms the universe was the right size and I knew where I was." Bitch! Every time I read that, it like gives me chills. I just loved the writing in this book. I connected with it so much. I thought it was so beautiful. There are so many thought-provoking passages in this book, not only talking about like feminist themes and like motherhood and like those kinds of things, but also just about like life in general and like aging and like how difficult it was to be a nurse during the COVID pandemic because our character Valerie was a nurse in the COVID pandemic. And the reason why I say this feels like a book that was written just for me is because this book reminded me a lot of the book Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which is like one of my favorite nonfiction books that I've ever ever read. Like, I always say Wild is a book that really like changed my life when I read it. And it reminded me of Wild with the way that it talks about like hiking in the wilderness and like why people feel the need to go on these hikes in the first place. And being surrounded by nature can really like heal something inside of you. I just love books that talk about nature in this way. And then coming in at number 11 is going to be The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. This is definitely like one of my top favorite horror books that I've read this year. And this is actually one that I read right around Halloween time. This book really took me off guard when I read it because I'm not always the biggest fan of slashers when it comes to horror. And this one is a slasher that takes place in a retirement home, which is so horrifying when you really think about it. We're following this protagonist named Rose who is in her 70s. You know, the scariest thing about a serial killer in a retirement home is that, you know, when people are dying in a retirement home, it's not exactly the kind of thing that's going to turn a lot of heads, you know? There's a quote that kind of mentions this that I really love when she says, "The residents of Autumn Springs are of an age where death simply isn't the tragedy it once was. It isn't sneaking up on anybody. It isn't a thief in the night snatching away your struggling spirit while it desperately clings to life. And it sure as hell isn't a surprise." And it says, "Death is hunkered in every shadow of every room. It hovers in the high corners like a giant spider. It stands at your bedside and watches you sleep. And then, when it's time, death simply taps you on the shoulder, whispers softly in your ear, and slips its icy hand into yours. For the residents of Autumn Springs Retirement Home, death isn't a horror movie. It's an inevitability. Sometimes it's even a comfort, and sometimes it's even a friend." Dude! The writing in this book actually like gives me chills all over my body. Like, it is so beautiful, so stunning. This book actually reminded me a lot of We Spread by Ian Reid, which is like one of my favorite books that I've ever read in my life. And both of these books happen to take place in retirement homes. I've talked about this a lot this year, how like lately I've been loving reading books from the perspective of an elderly character, just because I love following these characters who have had so much life experience and kind of get to like reflect on their life. I love the way this character talks about what it's like to live during her sunset years. It's just so beautiful. There are so many moments in this book that have really stuck with me since I read them, and I think about this character Rose all the time. Like, I just love her so much. Alright, moving on to my top 10 books of 2025. Coming in at number 10 is going to be Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang. I don't even really know how to like pitch this book to you or how to even emphasize why I love this book so much, but we're basically following this woman who is living in New York City like during the COVID pandemic. Like, things are really hard. I think this one's taking place around like April or May of 2020, like right when the pandemic is becoming a serious thing. And right at the start of this book, our main character, her sister, dies because some guy pushes her in front of the subway and calls her a bat eater. And like, that is absolutely horrific, and I feel like this book is just so horrific. But I think this book does such a phenomenal job at showing the real life horror that Asian people were experiencing during the pandemic and like the amount of racism that they were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. It's really hard to stomach, but I feel like this author did such a great job with that. I also think the horror in this book is really specific and really unique because the character that we're following, her job is actually to clean up crime scenes. And so there's a lot of like really gruesome stuff that she witnesses like on a day-to-day basis, but also because she kind of feels like she's being like haunted by her sister in a lot of ways because they never had the best relationship. And you know, I do love books that are about sisters, even when they have like really complicated sister relationships. I just find it to be so interesting, and I really loved the way that this one was done. I also just loved the writing in this book so much. Like, the writing was so strong. Coming in at number 9 is going to be A Short Stay in Hell. This one is described as a horror novella, and it's a little bit of like an existential horror, which I've come to learn is like one of my favorite things when it comes to horror, apparently. We're following this character who has recently died, and they wake up in this hell that is so unique and so specific to them because they wake up in this vast library where like basically every book that has ever been written and could ever be written exists in this library, and it's just like infinite. It's endless. And this is one that I have not been able to stop thinking about all year long. Like, this book filled me with so much dread. It's like an existential crisis kind of book. It's like after you read this, you're like, what is even the point of life? Everything is meaningless. It's one of those books that like really fucks with your mind when you read it. It also really makes you think about time. Like when it says, do you have any idea how long eternity is? My heavens, what an imagination you humans have. What kind of god would leave you burning forever? The way this book just really talks about time and like the idea of eternity just really messed with me. It was so trippy. This is definitely the type of horror novel that's more like messing with your mind than anything, because it's not exactly the kind of book that I would describe as like scary, or it's not like creepy, but the more that you sit on this concept and the more that you really think about the horror of this situation for this character, it is just so mind-boggling. This is definitely one of those books that I would recommend for fans of like House of Leaves. Like if you're looking for something that's gonna make you feel so disoriented, this is one that I would highly recommend. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Sky Full of Elephants. This one is a sci-fi book that I read at the start of this year, like back in January, and I have not been able to stop thinking about this book all year. This is exactly the kind of like light sci-fi that I really enjoy, because this is the kind of sci-fi book that reminds me of like The Measure or something, where it asks like, if one thing were to happen in society, like how would the world look afterwards? And in this particular case, we're following these characters who are living in a world where one day every single white person wakes up and walks into the closest body of water and drowns. And so within one day, all the white people in the world are gone. And in this story, we're following this black character named Charlie. And this character, you know, before this happened, he was actually incarcerated and he was serving time in prison for something that he didn't do. And now the story's taking place a year later when he's working as a professor at a university. I think what makes this story really fascinating though and really complex is that this character, he has this 19-year-old daughter named Sydney, and she is actually biracial because she's half white and half black. And she is left as the only survivor in her family because all the rest of her family was white. And so she's very traumatized by this situation that happened, and she actually views this as like a really bad and awful thing that happened. Whereas it's interesting to have the dynamic because our main character Charles views this as like a positive thing in his life because he went from being incarcerated for something he didn't do to becoming a professor. And so I loved getting both of their perspectives in this book because I feel like they both had very different views of the world. Not only was this book so thought-provoking and so interesting and unlike anything that I've ever read before, but it was also just so beautifully written. Like there were so many quotes that really moved me. One of these quotes where it said, "In his dream, Charlie thought only of us, the noble we, not our dreams either, or even hopes, but the enormity, all the colors and energies and outcomes swallowed up to make a community of individuals never alone. No picket fences or pageantry, just open doors and all the space and time one needs to be oneself. We are energies," Charlie dreamt, constantly exchanging and mixing and charging. The writing itself was just absolutely incredible, and I just love this. I love this one so much. Coming in at number 7 for me is going to be Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. We're following this main character Gilda, and I've honestly never felt so seen by a main protagonist. Like this was my most relatable character of the year by far. I think the reason why I love this character so much is because she is so anxious, and she's like one of those people who like overthinks about every little thing, which I definitely saw myself in. And she's very obsessed with death and like the fact that we're all gonna die eventually. But something that I also love about this story that makes it kind of like hilarious is the fact that Gilda is a lesbian atheist who accidentally gets a job at a Catholic church. So I do feel like there's a lot of commentary there, and like that was something that added a lot of humor to this story for me and another reason why I really connected with it. But there were so many quotes in this book that made me like stop and think and feel. I just think this character had a way of like voicing things that like I've always felt, but I never knew how to voice those things myself. There was this moment in this book where a friend got her something as a gift, and the way that she responded to this was so relatable for me. And she says, "I find it so bizarre that I occupy space and that I am seen by other people. I feel like I am falling through space and Eleanor just threw me a rose. It's such a sweet, pointless gesture. It would be less devastating to fall through space alone without someone else falling next to me. Whenever someone does something nice for me, I feel intensely aware of how strange and how sad it is to know someone." Dude, what the fuck? Like, I understand her. Like, she gets me. This book might actually be like my most annotated book of the year, just in terms of how much I was underlining and being like, I relate to that, I love that, or moments that like made me crack up laughing. Like, this book was hilarious because there was a moment right in the beginning of this book where I was cracking up so much that I was like crying, because there's a moment where she was talking about how when she was a kid, she'd always heard the word atheist being used as like this negative thing. And so she's like, when my teacher gave me an F on a spelling test, I muttered under my breath, "What a fucking atheist." And then it says when her friend started a rumor that she was gay, she said, "Shut your goddamn atheist mouth, Gemma." Like, that is freaking hilarious. And I loved this. Like, this was exactly my kind of like weird humor too. Oh my god, I loved everything about this book. Then coming in at number 6 is my favorite sci-fi book that I've read this year, and that is The Merge by Grace Walker. And like, I cannot believe this book is a debut because it feels so good to find a new favorite author. Like, I am obsessed with this book. This is one of those sci-fi books that feels like it's a very light sci-fi and more of a thriller, and I feel like it has a lot to say about society and our world, because we're following these characters who are living in this world where people can like merge minds with other people. Basically, the idea for this is that the government is wanting people to merge. It's almost like a population control kind of a thing, where like they want two people to be able to merge into one body. But the thing about these characters is that we're following this young girl named Amelia, and she's like 25, and we're following her mother, Lori, who is this woman who's 65 and she's living with Alzheimer's, and they're going to be signing up for this testing trial together where they're trying to merge their minds together. And her mother, Lori, is going to be like the first Alzheimer's Alzheimer's patient to ever merge with somebody else, and they're just trying to see how it goes. And they're part of this testing group that's gonna have, you know, people with addiction merging with somebody or people with cancer merging with somebody, and they're trying to see like how it affects them. Oh my god, this book was so crazy and like so beautifully written. This book definitely tugged on my heartstrings because you not only follow from the daughter's perspective, but you also do follow from the mother's perspective who has Alzheimer's in this book, and it was just stunning. It was so hard to read, but it was so beautiful and just so well done, and I loved so much of the commentary in this book. Not only about things like government control and like climate change, then also like the huge gap in wealth, like the difference between how the rich people are living versus the poor people that are living in this society, and like how it affects them differently. I feel like this was so complex and just so interesting. And this story has an ending that shocked me so much, and I still don't know to this day how I feel about the very end of this book. It's definitely surprising, and it really went in a direction that I wasn't expecting, but like god, I just can't stop thinking about this book. I love this so much. Alright, we have made it to my top 5 books of the year. Coming in at number 5 is going to be my favorite romance book that I've read all year, and that is The X-Vows by Jessica Joyce. Dude, I'm absolute trash for this book. Like the way I want to drop everything and reread this book immediately, because I read this book back in February, okay, so it's been a minute. But the way that I loved this book so much, and I wasn't expecting to either, because this is actually a second chance romance, which I've described time and time again as like, it's not usually my thing. It's not usually for me. But like, this has got to be maybe the best second chance romance book that I've ever read in my life. Like this really changed everything for me, because now I'm like, okay, maybe I do like second chance romance. Like, I don't know. In this story, we're following this girl named Georgia, and she has this ex-boyfriend named Eli, but they broke up, I want to say like 5 years ago now, and they're gonna be reuniting and seeing each other again because their mutual best friend is getting married. I love romance books that involve weddings. Like, don't even get me started. It's so much fun. Everything that could go wrong for this wedding is going wrong, and it's chaotic, and they're having to like put out all these fires, but they're spending so much more time together. And like the tension between these two was ridiculous. Like, I've never seen tension written so well about two characters who have like already been together, because I think that's like usually my thing with like second chance romances, is that usually I'm like, there's not that much tension because like they already know each other so well, but there was something about the way this book was written. It was like the yearning between them. There was just something so romantic about this book, you know, reading about these characters who know each other so well, and they know each other's bodies so well, and they know how to make each other happy. And I liked that in this story, you're also like learning about how they let each other down and like how their breakup kind of happened to begin with. I did feel like it was all very realistic and very well done, because I feel like that's another thing with second chance romances. Sometimes I can be like, oh my god, eye roll, like they broke up for like the dumbest reasons, or like it was just a miscommunication or like something dumb like that. But I feel like this one, it all felt very realistic for me. But I think another reason why this one made it into like my top favorites of the year is not only because the romance was so good, but I also love the way that this book talks about friendships, and especially the way that it talks about friendships and like how they can change as you get older. It just made me want to get emotional with the way that it would describe how like we should put more effort into our friendships. It was just so beautiful and so well done, and this is a book that I want to reread over and over and over again. Coming in at number 4 is my favorite thriller that I've read so far this year. It's Julie Chan is Dead. I know I haven't been able to shut up about this book all year long, so I'm sorry, but this is easily my favorite thriller that I've read this year. Like, this book is absolutely unhinged and it's ridiculous, but I love everything about this. In this story, we're following this character named Julie Chan, and she's working in this supermarket as a cashier, and she has this twin sister named Chloe who got adopted by a rich family when they were younger. But right at the start of this book, her and Chloe are starting to reconnect again, and Chloe is actually this like super famous influencer who's like living in New York City, and she's very rich. And when Julie shows up at her apartment, Chloe is dead under like mysterious circumstances. Like, she doesn't know what happened to her, but she's dead. And then when the police show up, they're like, oh, excuse me, Chloe, and they mistake her for being her sister, so she decides that she's going to take the life of her sister Chloe. This book was so ridiculous and so unhinged. I was really surprised that I loved this one as much as I did, because I don't usually like thrillers that involve twins, and I don't usually like thrillers that involve like influencers, but there was something about the way this one was written, dude. This was so addicting. I could not put this book down. This was one of those thrillers that like I flew through this book in one afternoon. I loved all of the conversations about like social media and how social media is inherently unfair. And then I also loved the fact that the second half of this book really feels like it leans more in a horror direction. Like, I love this. It was so stupid. It's so ridiculous. This is exactly the kind of weird shit that I like in thrillers. It honestly reminded me a lot of my love for The Writing Retreat. Like, I feel like that's another one where people like really question me. It's either like 100% your thing or it's really not your thing. But for me, this is everything that I love in a thriller. Coming in at number 3 for me is gonna be this one, Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop. Oh my gosh, this is one that like all year long I was debating, like, is this my favorite book that I've read this year? Because I loved this. This was actually the first book that I read this year. It was such a glowing 5 stars for me, and I think this is one of those books that like you read this book and it kind of feels like it changes your life. I know that's really dramatic to say, I know it is, but it's so true for me. And we're just following this woman who's living in South Korea who owns this bookstore, and this book is just kind of like about her like day-to-day life. It's about her talking about her life and thinking about her life. It's also about her like hiring this guy to be a barista in her bookstore, and we kind of get to learn about him. It's one of those stories that's very like slice of life, but I think this book has the power to change your life because of the way that it makes you think about your own life and your choices and like the time that we're spending here on earth. I think this book is one of those beautiful reminders that like we only have so much time, and like you should be doing things that you really love, or like surrounding yourself with people who uplift you. And there were so many relatable quotes in this book that had me gooped and gagged. Like there was this one part when he said, instead of happiness, he spent more time thinking about productivity. To him, a happy life was perhaps a life where he used his time well. Dude, if that's not me, I swear to God. I loved all the conversations in this book about how like happiness is a journey and it's not a destination. When they said to achieve happiness at the end of life, you have to be miserable for a lifetime. When I think of it this way, happiness becomes horrible. It's such an empty feeling to stake everything on a single accomplishment in life. So I changed my mind and decided to chase after pleasure, the feeling of happiness instead. I think this book really pushes the idea that a day well spent is a life well lived. I think this book is just such a beautiful reminder to like appreciate the life that you have and stop comparing yourself to others, and like not everything is a race. And I also just love the way that this book talks about books and like how we read books to better understand ourselves. I know I sound like a Hallmark movie or something when I'm talking about this book. I swear it's gorgeously written. And there are so many quotes I could pull from this to try to convince you to read it, but this one is just so beautiful, and it's really changed my perspective and like the way that I view my life. All right, coming in at number 2 on my list is When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. Dude, Nat Cassidy has got to be like one of my top favorite horror authors because I am so obsessed with this book. And I've loved a lot of Nat Cassidy's books, but I think this one might be my new favorite from him, like ever. This book is actually just so hard to pitch to you because the synopsis of this book happens within the first like 20 to 30 pages, which I love how vague and mysterious that is because the synopsis barely tells you anything. And then you get to go on this crazy thrill ride. Oh my God, like I could not predict anything in this one. We're basically following this woman named Jess, who is a struggling actress. And one night when she gets home from a shift, she finds this 5-year-old boy like outside in the bushes of her apartment, and she's like, whoa, what's going on? And it says, after a violent, bloody encounter with the boy's father, she and the boy find themselves running for their lives. That's pretty much all you need to know jumping into this one. I will say this feels like one of the most like creative and unique horror books that I've read in a long time. When I say you cannot predict where this is going, like I definitely mean that. This was so shocking in so many ways. But I think what I loved most about this book was the characters. Like I feel like the characters were so well written. I think something that I really love about Nat Cassidy's horror novels is that you can tell that this author just puts his entire heart into his books. And the reason why I say that is because he always includes these like author's notes at the end of the book. And like this one is like over 10 pages long, I think, where he talks about what this book meant to him and like how it connects to his own life. And I feel like you can really tell when it's like a passion project for an author. I just love this. Oh my God, it made me emotional towards the end. Like this was so good. This was definitely like my favorite adult horror that I read this year. All right, and then my number 1 favorite book that I've read this year. I know it's not going to be a surprise to anyone probably, because my number 1 is Don't Let the Forest In by C.J. Drews. Oh my God, I love this book so much. This one is actually a young adult horror romance book, but this book is another one of those books that feels like it was written just for me. Like, and I feel like I read this at the perfect time. So in the story, we're following these 2 young boys named Thomas and Andrew. They both go to this like academy school that's like in the middle of this forest, and Thomas does a lot of like illustrating and he's a really good artist. And the story's kind of about how he's starting to draw these like different monsters who are coming to life at night and trying to kill them. And then the romance in this book is also like so good because Andrew has this twin sister named Dove, and for some reason he's a little suspicious that like Dove and Thomas like each other, when in reality it's like very obvious, I think, to us as the reader that Thomas is like obsessed with him, and like they're both obsessed with each other and they're so in love. But like the yearning in this book was written so well. It's like the kind of writing that is just so atmospheric, and it really just triggers all of your senses with the way that it's written. The way that Andrew describes Thomas in this book, like I'm just obsessed with this. When he says, oh, there was a wildness about him, this boy made of angular frowns and thorny words. He was brilliant and terrible and unmanageable. And what I mean when I say that this book is so atmospheric with the writing, I mean, listen to this shit. when it says the night was a living thing breathing with them as they stood in the forest. Moss thickened in their lungs and they could taste autumn leaves. It says if the trees belonged to Thomas, midnight was in love with Andrew. It made him braver somehow, invisible, hiding his delicate edges and leaving behind a lean and hungry shadow. Like, dude, what the fuck? That is some of the most gorgeous writing I've ever read in my life. So not only was like the writing in this book just absolutely gorgeous, and like I felt so much for these characters and I shipped it so hard and the yearning was written so well between them, but also I think a huge reason why this is my #1 favorite book that I've read this year is because our main character, Andrew, he's asexual in this book, and a lot of this book is him talking about his asexuality, trying to figure out how he feels. And you know, because I'm asexual, I just really connected to that part of his story, and I felt so seen by a lot of the things that he said and the way that he describes himself. God, it was just so beautiful, like so well done. Like, it was dark and disturbing, and like some of the horror was actually really grotesque for a young adult book. Also, the way that this book would talk about the forest and the yearning between these two boys, like I cannot deal with it. I loved this. It's my favorite thing that I've read this year. Those are all of the best books that I read in the year of 2025. What an amazing year of books it has been, truly. I would love to know if you ended up reading any of the books that ended up on my favorites. What did you think of them? Are they also some of your favorite books of the year? I would also love to know, please let me know in the comments, what are your top 3 favorite books of the year, or even top 5 favorite books of the year? Let me know, because I am very nosy and I want to know what your top favorites are. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!